It's time to take you through the press now. We're joined on set by Florence Villeminot.
Hi, Hala.
Good to see you, Flo. Let's start off with the French front pages, full, of course, of these student protests. Very unhappy at the government's plan to reform the labour code. And the government's facing mounting pressure and is perhaps ready to make concessions.
That's right. These students have been holding protests for weeks now. Yesterday, the demonstration wasn't as big as the one last Thursday, which was quite massive across the country. And it proves that this protest movement is alive and kicking. Student representatives are actually going to meet with the labor minister today to lay out their grievances. And according to Libération, the left-leaning paper, the government is really in damage control. You can see they're talking about opération déminage. It's kind of like a mine-sweeping operation to try and get all the sticking points out of this very controversial law. Now, the government has already watered down its original version of the bill to reform the labor code. And according to Libé, it could water it down further still.
Well, let's focus on that demo. It started out as being opposed to these government reform plans, but it's really transformed into something else.
That's right, and just what it's turning into isn't clear, but Libé is very excited about the fact that there's change regardless. Is this some sort of a movement that's starting? A lot of people are saying that perhaps it could be the French Podemos or the Occupy movement. What's clear, according to Libé in its editorial here, is that ever since last Thursday's national demonstration, thousands of people in dozens of cities across the country have been meeting up every night in town squares to discuss, to hold debates. They're searching for a new way of thinking, a new way of doing politics, and nobody's really sure what this embryo is going to turn into, but there is a lot of hope. And not just amongst the left, but also among the right, according to Libération. There's hope that there's going to be change, and this desire, this longing for something, this feeling of desire is really quite good for the country, but it's quite bad for the government, according to Libération. L'Humanité, the communist paper, is also excited by the change, or this budding change that we're starting to see. You can see here the front page. It says, from the streets to central squares, they're searching for a new future, a future that is very different from what this law, this El Khomri law, this law to reform the labor code, what that represents.
Well, the government has said that it's ready to compensate young people for the labour reform, and that's a move that's drawn criticism from the right-wing press.
That's right. L'Opinion, the pro-business paper, is worried about what this is going to cost. Does the government have to pay for its reforms? Because it seems like every time the government tries to push through a controversial reform, well, it has to pull out its wallet and essentially throw cash at the problem to hush up protesters. That's exactly what it did with angry taxi drivers. Remember, in recent months, they've been holding protests against Uber, etc. Well, the government decided that it was going to buy back the very expensive taxi licenses, and this is going to cost a couple of billions of dollars to the government. So L'Opinion says, so it has to pay every time it wants to reform. It's kind of like an unpopular kid in the schoolyard that tries to buy people off, and by trying to buy its popularity, the government essentially is admitting it's weak.
Oh dear. Well, another story that's dominating the French press is, of course, the Panama Papers. And yesterday, the story touched a bit too close to home, didn't it? With people close to far-right leader Marine Le Pen and her father implicated in the scandal.
That's right. The Le Pen family has been splashed by the Panama Papers scandal. That's what Le Parisien is reporting on today. Now, Jean-Marie Le Pen's former butler and one of Marine Le Pen's close advisors have appeared in this massive document leak. Now, Jean-Marie Le Pen, the elderly man, the elderly father, said, I don't have anything to do with this Panama thingy, while his daughter Marine tried to brush it off with a joke. Here's what her reaction was. If we had money abroad, that would be good news. It would mean that we wouldn't have to ask people for donations. But despite the fact that she's trying to play down the scandal, Le Parisien reports that it really couldn't come at a worse time for the party, because remember, there's a very important election next year, the presidential election, and the party is right in the middle of gearing up for that election right now.
Ill-advised to be making jokes like that, certainly. But the communist paper L'Humanité is loving this story, aren't they?
That's right. They're calling it the Le Pen connection. The mask has finally dropped, according to L'Humanité. And it says, let's not pretend to be surprised here. The National Front's double standards go well beyond its program. Now, what's interesting is Marine Le Pen has really publicly lash out for years against what she calls the shady, harmful world of global finance that goes against the general interest. And surprise, surprise, here it appears that her own party or people close to her party have been embezzling money abroad. So L'Humanité says, just connect the dots. Ideological lies, financial lies, enough is enough, really, according to L'Humanité.
And let's finish up, Flo, with a quick word about a law that's set to be voted on today that will penalise paying for sex.
That's right. The tables have turned when it comes to prostitution in France. Let's take a look at the front page of Aujourd'hui en France, Le Parisien. You can see the client is now going to be the criminal or the offender when it comes to prostitution. If caught in the act, the client will be sentenced to a fine of 1,500 euros or 3,750 euros if it's a repeat offender. So all this is good on paper, according to a lot of French media. But will the law really be applied? Well, Le Figaro reports that police unions are already saying that they're way too understaffed and they have better things to do given the current terrorist threat. So they're probably not going to apply this prostitution law. And on top of that, the law has drawn criticism for being disconnected from reality because it fails to address the real problem when it comes to prostitution rings that exploit prostitutes.
Which, of course, draws into the whole problem of people trafficking, smuggling, which we haven't really been too good at dealing with today, have we? Thanks very much, Florence Villeminot, with a look at the French front papers. More